Hello, welcome back to the In Our Bodies podcast. I'm your host, Henry. This episode, we have with us George Lubon. George Lu's pronouns are they, she. A little bit about George Lu. Unable to pick just one minority status, George Lubon uses their experience as a queer disabled femme of color to create music, art, and pole dance, exploring life at the intersection. Hello, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you for having me. I'm very excited.
Thank you for coming on. When our guests feel comfortable disclosing, I usually like to start off the podcast asking a little bit of general information about your disability and maybe for your case also your experience getting diagnosed.
Sure. So I should start by saying I have sort of two separate disabilities. Within those, they have like a wide array of like connected ones, but I have two sort of non-connected disabilities.
Got it.
The first of which is called Ehler Danlos syndrome, or EDS type 3, which basically is genetic. So I've always had it, and it affects the connective tissue in your body. So like the stuff that holds together your joints and your blood vessels and your organs, that stuff in my body is too stretchy. That just means that I dislocate my joints a lot of the time. I have difficulty with like blood pooling in my legs, so I get very faint and dizzy a lot. So that's sort of like one of them. And the second one is quite recent for me, actually. Only diagnosed with it over the pandemic, which is called multiple sclerosis, which I think is a little bit more common. So people are usually more likely to know what it is. But basically, it's an autoimmune condition, which means that some part of my immune system is attacking some part of my body. And for multiple sclerosis, that means like the fatty layer outside your nerve cells in your brain and in your spinal cord. So you can think of it like a wire, like an electrical wire, the sort of plastic bit on the outside. My body, it keeps attacking that, which just means that different parts of my brain and spinal cord start let's say malfunctioning at different times. So like my first, you call it a relapse, was basically that like my body went numb from the boob down over the course of like a week and stayed that way for a while. And it's like gotten a lot better now, but my optic nerves, so the nerves that communicate between your eyes and your brain, they had a relapse. So like I lost vision in one eye for a while and it's mostly come back, but like dodgily.
The short term for the second one is MS, right?
Yeah, MS.
MS is something that you didn't get diagnosed until very recently.
Yeah.
And were those symptoms quite recent as well? Or is it something that you had but didn't know was MS?
So it's complicated. Basically, I don't know.
Okay.
Because I mentioned that with the EDS, I get very faint. And I have like a history of like kind of passing out, but I don't lose consciousness. I just flop. And in sort of EDS terms, they couldn't like put their finger on it, but there's lots of things around EDS that cause that. So they just assume like, oh, it's part of it, but we don't know exactly what. Probably just some kind of malfunction with your nervous system. But now that I have an MS diagnosis, I've noticed that those fainting spells, they happen before I'm about to have a relapse. Like every time. So I can't tell if it's just like the MS makes the EDS worse or if those fainting spells were always MS, because I didn't have them when I was a kid. So like,
interesting.
Yeah, so I don't know. I don't know.
I think also just, I think for diagnoses are helpful to a degree, but it's never a hard line of things, right? Your body is one and like everything does interact with each other. And I don't think that everybody has all the answers and it's not all separated that neatly, right?
Yeah, exactly. It's very, very blurry in my case.
And how was the diagnosis process? How did you get diagnosed with EDS and MS?
So the EDS was a long process of about like 12 years of me noticing small things and then going to my doctor and being like, this is wrong. And then being like, oh, no, it's fine. It's chill. You're fine.
You're fine.
Yeah. I had like a wide variety. Like I ended up at A&E once as a kid because my foot was in terrible pain, and now I know that I dislocated a toe partially.
Okay.
But they wrote in their report suspected stub toe. And the amount of medical gaslighting is just, but yes, so that took about 12 years of me going back and forth to doctors. And then in the end, I just did my own research. And then I found EDS, and then I found the diagnostic criteria, and I was like, oh, cool, I meet this whole thing. So I went to my GP.
Check.
With the diagnostic criteria printed out and like showed them everything. And then they were like, okay, fine, we'll refer you to the right people. And then even then, it was going to be like a year before I got to speak to someone. So I like pulled together funds like from myself and my family, and then went private to get a final diagnosis so that I didn't have to wait a year.
A whole year extra after the 12 years of being pretty much ignored or dismissed. It's not even a 12-year search that they were trying to search for something. It was 12 years, and then you had to do your own research, and you essentially diagnosed yourself and then brought it to a professional and had to pay out of pocket because the waiting time was too long, because 12 years is 12 years too long already.
Yeah.
Wow.
So that was EDS.
But then, so officially, when you got diagnosed, how old were you?
Oh, that's a good question. I was in my 3rd year of uni, so that must have been 2015.
Okay. So 3rd year of uni, so probably around 20, right? So this is probably something you've like felt all throughout your childhood, or a lot of your childhood, and not until, you're an early adult before you finally start to have some answers in ways that could be helpful to you.
Yeah. I find it happens with a lot of people with genetic conditions. Like you sort of, I don't know, like for me, I was like in pain all the time as a kid, but I just thought that was how life was because I'd always been in pain. So like, I would just think I was being lazy if we were out shopping and I was really hurting, but it's like, oh yes, people hurt when they walk. So like, everyone gets tired.
I was just going to ask you if people just assumed you were lazy, or for me, I think every solution was that, oh, you're just not exercising enough. If you exercised more, then your joints would be better. Was that also part of your experience?
Kind of. I should probably put a bit of a content warning for eating disordered. I was never diagnosed with an eating disorder, but content warning for anybody that wants to switch off right now. I'm about to talk about some disordered eating and such topics. I had some serious body image issues as a kid and as a teen, so I was obsessed with exercise. So nobody told me I needed to do more because I was always trying to do my best. Like when I was 7, I asked my mum if I could join a gym because I was so sure that I was like completely overweight. And looking back, I totally wasn't. But I had some bad issues. So I did myself a lot of damage because I had, obviously, my joints weren't stable. And I was like obsessively trying to become thinner through exercise and various eating rubbish.
Feel you on that.
Yeah, so I wasn't generally called lazy at all, but I did think I was lazy because I would sort of like do loads of exercise and then I would mess up my joints, but I didn't know that's what was happening. And then I wouldn't feel like I could do more because obviously my joints were a mess. But in my head, it was just like, oh, I don't have the willpower to push through the pain of exercise, that kind of thing.
I feel like it's such a journey to understand physical and emotional boundaries, just as a general kind of like statement in there, because I think that for some reason we kind of just expect ourselves to, we just really disregard our pain as people, or that's what I've noticed for myself, and I think I'm hearing that from you as well, just kind of like how we understand ourselves when we're younger. It's not until, for some of us, it's not until we're older when we kind of like start to be like, wait a moment,
Yeah.
this is not okay.
Yeah. 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 And I think it took me a really long time to just like listen to my body and be like, oh, like the purpose of this life thing is not for me to force my body to do stuff.
Mm,
It's to like live within my body and enjoy it. Not, yeah.
yeah, I feel that. And how about for your MS diagnosis? Or when did you, I know that especially when you already have a diagnosis of like EDS, it might be hard to assume that it's something else. And how do you go about kind of searching for answers in that way?
Hmm. So it was actually quite easy because
Okay.
the symptoms were so different from anything I'd ever
Okay.
experienced.
Got it.
Um, it was so the first few symptoms were like reasonably not that noticeable. Like my legs were getting like a little bit pins and needly for like a day, but that happens sometimes with EDS because when your joints mess up, they compress a nerve somewhere,
Hmm.
and then so I
And
just
you said
assumed
your
it was
blood pools in your legs which could also
yeah,
do
exactly.
that. Yeah.
So at the beginning, I didn't think it was anything, and then like 7 a.m. in the morning, I woke up with like the worst headache slash neck ache of my life. Like
Mm,
it was. I can't explain nerve pain to people who haven't had nerve pain, but
sure.
your nerves are the things that communicate that pain is happening. So when your nerves are being attacked, it is loud in
Yeah,
pain terms.
I can assume.
So I like crawled out of bed and got to the kitchen because I sort of assumed that my joints were messing up and that it was compressing something it shouldn't be.
Mm,
But usually, then if I stand up, it goes away quite fast.
okay.
And nothing was happening. And I phoned my mum at like 7 a.m. and was just like not saying words that made any sense. And then my partner got out of bed, one of my partners, and then I asked them to call an ambulance because I didn't know
Yeah.
what on earth was going on.
Hmm.
And yes, and then A&E and neurologists, and it was like right in the middle of a lockdown,
Right.
quite close to the beginning of the pandemic. So
Okay.
nobody could come with me. It was horrible. I was just like in my pajamas, sitting in A&E by myself, waiting for people to come and talk to me and tell me why this was happening. And you don't get diagnosed with MS straight away because you need
Hmm.
to have an MRI, which is like a scan that's really expensive. So it takes a long time for them to like have space for you
Okay.
to do the scan.
Hmm.
So the doctor I saw by the end of the day was just like, look, I think you probably have MS,
Okay.
but it's not definite.
Hmm.
And then like MRI showed scarring on my brain and spinal cord, and then like you have to wait to have a second clinical episode for them
Okay.
to be like, yes, 100% it is MS. Because sometimes
Okay.
people just have like one random episode like that in their lives and then it never turns into anything else.
Wow.
So you have to, there are other ways to be diagnosed, but my way was you have to wait to your second clinical episode. And then when I had that clinical episode, which was the one where I started losing vision, um, that was when I sort of had my definite, complete MS diagnosis.
So both of these episodes were during the pandemic.
Yeah.
What was it like kind of waking up in kind of like something so traumatic and so much pain, going to the emergency and almost on the spot getting a diagnosis like MS? Like, did you know anything about MS? Like that
Yeah.
kind of changes your world a little bit, right?
Oh, yeah. I did know about MS because part of my degree that I did was neuroscience.
Okay.
So I studied a lot about the brain and the various conditions you can have with the brain.
Mm-hmm.
So I knew enough to know how not good that diagnosis was in the moment.
Okay.
And I remember sort of just thinking like, oh, I wish you hadn't said that. I
Yeah.
didn't want to know
Especially you
that.
had no support system. You're just there alone
Yeah.
after having gone through something super like immediate and painful.
Yeah, it wasn't a good day.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, it was that whole diagnosis process was like vaguely traumatic. In not the same way as it would be for somebody who wasn't already disabled. Because I
Mm-hmm.
was very aware that I already had a lot of the skills that I knew I would need. Um, like I don't know, like the headspace that lots of disabled people stay in, where like you think about things going wrong with your body as like, okay, so how am I going to make adaptations
Yeah.
so that I can live with this thing?
We are
So I
inventors.
yeah, exactly. So I already had that, and I knew that that was going to be really helpful.
Mm-hmm.
But MS is really different from EDS in like a few quite important ways. It's quite definitely progressive, whereas
Mm-hmm.
EDS sometimes gets worse when you get older, but like not dramatically for everyone.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas MS, unless you die before you get to the progressive stage, will progress into like the secondary phase where you just keep getting worse and worse and worse instead of having like relapse and then recover a bit, relapse and then
Yeah.
recover a bit.
Mm-hmm.
So that is scary. And
Yeah.
that took me a little while to get my head round and to sort of accept and process.
Mm-hmm.
And then also, because you have these random relapses and you've got no idea which part of your body they're going to affect because it's your brain and spinal cord. So, like, literally anywhere could be the
Right.
next.
Take your pick.
Yeah. So, it's also scarier because there's so much uncertainty. Like,
Mm-hmm.
I can't plan for anything because
Yeah.
literally anything could just go terribly wrong very quickly.
And every time it's a very steep learning curve, isn't it?
Yeah, because it happens within like 5 days, and then all of a sudden you can't see out of one eye, and then it's like, oh, okay.
Okay, I guess I'm gonna learn how to not see out of one eye now. Okay, cool.
Yeah, basically. And oh, yeah,
And is there ever like a known timeline of how long a relapse is even going to be lasting for you?
no. Because like technically it could just never get better.
Right.
Usually it does, but usually there's some permanent damage done. So
Mm-hmm.
you never know to what extent you will get back the thing or
Mm-hmm.
how long it will take to get back.
Just holding space and sending a lot of warmth and love for that kind of uncertainty. It's not the same for my condition, but I do hold a bit of uncertainty in the way that my body works as well, and it's never been something that I've been able to easily reconcile with. You know what I mean? Some days I'm okay with it, and some days I really dwell on it, and it's not a fun thing. So I just wanted to like give the space and just shoot you all the love and hold you lots because, that's what we need to do for each other all the time.
Yes, thank you for the
Yes.
love and cuddle.
Always love. I wanted to ask, is there currently a daily routine that you find helpful for your body? And I was going to ask this, but I'm assuming this routine has to change because your body is constantly changing. But currently, is there a routine that works for you?
Yes. In fact, like the routine that I'm sort of developing, because I assume it's always going to be in development,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
um, has been so important for me to sort of, I guess, function. I don't like that word all the time, but I can't think of a better one, so we'll go
Mm.
for function. Um,
Do your things.
yes, I can do the things that I want to do.
Yeah.
Um, yes, so like my routine is basically based around the central concept of stop trying to do things you can't do,
Mm.
um, and do things that you can do, because I know that sounds really obvious, but it was not
It's
obvious
not.
to me.
Mm-mm.
um, it like I the sort of, I guess, commitment happened a few years ago when I was like still freelancing, and I was doing a lot of like tutoring and teaching kids, and I was supposed to be tutoring this kid in some library, and they're a teenager, so they didn't show up. So I was just like sitting with my laptop thinking like, okay, so if I commit to not doing things that I can't do, like what does my life look like? And it was like this whole set of things. So the routine kind of came from that. And the sort of first part of the routine is basically to front load all physical tasks, because by the end of the day, my body may be like completely just like it's not going to do anything. It might be that I have enough spoons to go to a pub if we're not in the pandemic, and see some friends, or even do a performance, but like you never know. So the evening is always an unknown quantity. So things like I must do any housework that has to be done in the morning. Like I do the dishes as soon as I wake up. Some days I won't even have the spoons to do that, but usually if I do it straight away, there's enough spoons. And that's also when I do pole dancing, because
you do those in the morning?
yeah,
Nice.
yeah, because it's like the time my body is most likely to be like, sure, I will gyrate round a pole. Also when I play the piano is in the morning.
Okay.
And then I start like my full-time job at like 11 a.m. So I have quite a bit of time in the morning to do like the stuff that's important for my self-care, I guess. And then I work from home, and I work flexible hours, but in general I will then work from 11 a.m. to 7 p.m.
Okay.
And then because the evening is such an unknown quantity, I don't really make specific plans for evenings.
Yeah, it's just kind of it's just, you've recognized for you, it just makes more sense to leave it open-ended. Some days you might have some energy to do some stuff, and some days it's just going to be a little more low-key, right?
Yeah, and that took me like a really long time to accept, because I like doing so many things, and I really wanted it to be the case that I could use my evenings to do things. But I have come to accept that it's a bad idea to commit to stuff for evenings.
Yeah. It's just, again, right? Just learning your boundaries and what works for you.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Is there a part of your day or part of what you need to do to manage your disability that is quite hard, but like so normalized for you that, I don't know, that a lot of people around you don't really know about?
Yes, I was having a think about this, and I think the sort of like biggest one is everything I do moment by moment to keep my joints in their sockets. So like it doesn't matter like what I'm doing, unless I'm sleeping, I always have to be checking in with my joints. So like if I'm walking and I'm talking to somebody, at the same time I'm thinking, are the right muscles engaged so that I don't dislocate my hips while I'm walking? Um, are my knees at the right angle?
Yeah.
And like always, there's no choice. I mean, like I can stop doing it, but then I will dislocate something, and then
Yeah.
so I don't think the people I spend time with necessarily realize that I'm literally always multitasking.
Yeah.
There's
There is no like, you just have to, like, your body is one that demands that you have to be attentive to it all the time.
yes,
You have to be the expert, and you have to know what's going on, because sometimes the consequences can be dire,
yes, exactly.
you know?
Um,
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. It's just, that's exactly what, obviously there's no expectations in answers, but that's exactly kind of what I wanted to convey, or like what I was thinking about for myself as well, because there's just so many little things that happen, and there's no point explaining it to people. Like, they don't need to know about it. It's fine. Like, there's just so many things. Like, I'd rather talk about something else, but like there's just so many little things, right? Like, that you need to make sure that you're okay and you're doing a great job taking care of your body.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Um, are there times where others anticipate your access needs without you having like explicitly tell them?
Yeah, I was thinking about this one too. And I think like the biggest one for me is probably food. I
Mm,
have quite a restricted diet because basically I eat things that are unlikely to cause lots of inflammation, so like a
okay.
low histamine diet. Um, so there's very few things I can eat,
Mm-hmm.
and going out for like food is always dangerous because it's not like an allergy where you can give them this one food that and tell them like make sure you don't put this in because it's like a whole variety of them. And if
Mm,
I've misjudged something on the menu or forgotten to ask about a specific ingredient,
yeah.
then I will become very fatigued very fast.
Okay.
And like sometimes it's like not awful and I'll just get itchy, and sometimes it's like I'm moving through syrup, and then
Yeah.
I have to be able to get home from that place.
Mm-hmm.
So whenever I have like friends or family, that just automatically make sure that the restaurant we're going to has like good ingredients lists that I can like go through,
Mm,
or in general have good policies around allergies, and like
yeah.
have a menu where like that friend may have like flicked through the menu just to check if there's like anything they can identify that I might be able to eat.
Mm-hmm.
um, that just makes my life so much easier.
Oh, I love that. That's a good one for sure. Because you, as you said, right? Like you're multitasking and thinking about a million other things, and it's not unlikely that sometimes you forget one thing or two things for your health, right? I remember once, like I told someone in my life that sometimes it's nice if like if you could be the one that asks, because sometimes I forget, and they told me they're like, well, it's your allergy, it's your responsibility to make sure you're okay. And at that moment I was like, yeah, but like my allergies are continuously evolving. I kind of forget, and also like there's just so many other things in my body that I'm thinking about.
Yeah,
So yeah, that's a great access need. That's those. I hope lots of your friends do that, because that's a super awesome one.
it is. And it takes like the weight off in terms of social expectation. Because I find with some people that don't understand dietary requirements,
Mm.
they don't realize that by being like, oh, I want to go to this specific restaurant, they don't realize how hard it is for me to then be like, oh, well, we can't.
Well, then they're if they're really adamant about it, they're literally just excluding you, right?
Yeah,
By doing that, or by being like, oh, or by disregarding your dietary needs, like they're essentially just excluding you from this social event.
yeah, and I think there's so much culturally about people being picky eaters,
Mm-hmm.
that people they almost resent people that can't just eat everything.
Yeah.
Um, and I find that there's like because that's a cultural thing. I find with people who aren't very conscious about the way they think about, I guess, disability related things, although lots of
Mm-hmm.
allergies, people with allergies without themselves to be disabled.
Mm-hmm.
Um, yeah, the people that aren't very conscious, I feel like they just slip into that narrative of, oh,
Yeah.
George is being difficult. But,
Yeah. Also, I think something that I also just realized, that I think that everybody's palate is just really different. And some people who quote unquote can eat everything just might find a lot of things very pleasant. And some people just find a lot of tastes and textures really offensive. And that's fine. You know what I
yeah,
mean? Like there's nothing wrong with that.
yeah, exactly. I think it's like I don't know, it's like a weird prejudice. I don't know where it's from. Maybe from ableism, maybe from,
The answers are always ableism and capitalism, aren't they?
yes. Um,
I wanted to ask, so we use vocabulary like access needs, or we talk about ableism, and this is uh, vocabulary prevalent in the disability community, or like disability culture discourse. And I was wondering, when you found the disability community, if that makes sense at all.
yeah, it makes sense. Um, a lot of different places over time. So probably the first one were the EDS Facebook groups,
Okay.
which were just like this amazing resource because, as I mentioned, most of the process of having EDS, for not just me, for a lot of people with EDS, is just being majorly gaslit, sorry, gaslit by doctors. So the community space is really strong because you need people to be like, no, you're not like imagining things. Those are real symptoms. And that community was so supportive after I got a diagnosis and I was at university at the time and dealing with some pretty horrible ableism at uni.
Yeah.
And I could just go there and like complain.
Amazing.
And you'd get responses from people being like, yeah, it's shit. I'm
Yeah.
sorry. Have a cyber hug. So that was the first space, and it's a lovely, lovely space. And then there's sort of over time quite a few different spaces. So like I think like I mentioned a lot on Insta and things I think a lot that I'm sort of part of the London kink and fetish scene, which has quite a high proportion of disabled people.
Yeah.
Probably because people that do kink stuff think more about how different bodies will react to different things consciously.
I feel like if you're doing kink properly, then yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think kinky people are much more likely to sort of either have had to think about their bodies like that for other reasons or will form relationships with disabled people easily or more easily than people who haven't thought that way about sexual things and blah, lots of other reasons. So like the kink community, I found a lot of wonderful disabled people that sort of taught me a lot about disabled community and things like that. And then also the queer scene in London. I joined a group that no longer exists, but we were called like the London Bi Pandas. And even though we were like, it was supposed to be like bisexual, pansexual people, there are lots of disabled people in that group also. And that group was very heavily into activism. So a lot of the language around disability activism and advocacy came from those wonderful people. And then like past that, I guess I started reading really wonderful sort of disability activists' life stories, like Judy Truman from the States. It's Leah, Lakshmi, Piepzna-Samarasinha.
Yeah.
I'm hoping I said that right.
Care Work.
Yes.
Care Work was the first book I read as well. I'll definitely be linking them down in our little show notes. What was it like going from not having kind of any language around disability or illness or chronic illness or ableism to finding it?
I think also this has been over time. Like things like the word gaslighting was such like an amazing word for me to find because like my whole experience of diagnosis for EDS was a series of basically people trying to convince me that I was imagining my symptoms, and
or that you stubbed your toe.
Yeah, or that I stubbed my toe. Like I still feel angry about that to this day.
Yeah.
But yeah, so like having that word has been really helpful in conceptualizing, I guess, who is at fault. Because gaslighting is very much about the person doing the gaslighting. Whereas when you're sort of thinking about those things, you may end up thinking about them in, I guess, like a victim-centric perspective where you're thinking like, why didn't I believe myself? Why didn't I do more to advocate for myself? Why didn't I go back and ask for a second opinion? Why didn't I blah, 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 blah. So like having language that properly puts the fault where it belongs has been really useful for me to sort of like stop blaming myself for my, like, I guess like now I find it really difficult to go to doctors for help because then you have to go through and think, well, like, are they going to believe me? Is this pointless? Are they going to just treat me like I'm being silly? Is this going to be like vaguely traumatic? Which is dangerous, obviously, because doctors are supposed to be who you go to for help if something is wrong.
Mm-hmm.
But yes, so yeah, I think having specific language and each piece of that language set has come in different times.
Mm-hmm.
I forgot to mention, have you ever heard of Jessica Kelgren Fozard?
Yes.
She taught me so much about ableism, like that
Mm.
word and what it meant. Um, so like things like that, like finding that YouTuber
Right,
and
right.
learning that way also helps you stop blaming yourself a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
Um, yes, so I guess the language over time has helped pop different shame bubbles or blame bubbles.
Actually, it was very interesting that you said that there is a connection between like kink and disability. Because like there's just like with kink, it's a lot about like. Actually, I don't know what it's a lot about because I'm not part of the kink scene, but I can assume that it's a lot about like boundaries and just kind of like different people exploring what they like in a very like non-judgmental way, right? Like coming as you are in the body that you are, and just recognizing the variedness in what people enjoy and what people's bodies are like, right?
Yeah, I mean, for someone not on the kink scene, that was a very good.
Thanks. I'm interested. But because one of the questions I wanted to ask is if you feel like there's any link between disability and queerness as well,
Hmm.
you know?
So I have been thinking about this, and I think yes, in the way that both disability and queerness force you to think very consciously about self
Mm,
in a way that non-queer and non-disabled people don't have to.
mm,
So like just thinking about your gender means a lot of things. It means like picking apart what body means versus what identity means versus what mood means.
mm,
And I think those same skills you use with a lot of, at least with my disabilities, this sort of whole body versus identity versus mood is so
mm,
smushed.
mm.
Yeah, that's not a word.
It
But
is now.
yes, it is. So I think they like. I think a lot of people who are queer are also disabled, but perhaps because of the way disability forces you to think, you're more likely to realize you're queer or
Yeah,
accept that you're queer, and
yeah.
also vice versa, because not all disabled people seek diagnoses or ever accept that they are disabled or identify with
Mm-hmm,
that word.
mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And sometimes when you're already other, it's easier to see the other
Of the
others.
other.
um,
Yeah, that's what I was thinking about that as well. I sometimes I wonder if it's because for me with my chronic illness, just the way you digest your body is just different, and there is a certain point, or at least for me, there's a certain point where you just kind of have to accept that you're not quote unquote normal, whatever normal means, or can't fit into that box, and in that way, you're just more susceptible to be a weirdo in all of the other ways because it's kind of like, well, you have to interrogate your body and you understand that you don't follow these rules anyways, or these rules just don't really make sense. So like you start interrogating the rules that are set for, you know, your gender identity or for like your sexuality and all of these things as well.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Could you speak a little bit about disability joy with me?
Yes, of course. I I'm really happy to speak about this because I recently did like a digital showpiece where the development of it made me like think really carefully about what exactly I meant by disability joy. Basically, in my head, disability joy is a practice rather than a feeling.
Mm,
It's a way of looking at life. So like the examples I try to give are things like, let's say you're having a really bad day in terms of pain and you're in bed all day. There are lots of ways you could look at that. You could be in bed and be like railing against the fact that you have a disability or railing
Mm-hmm.
against the pain and spend the whole time in conflict with your body and your head.
Mm-hmm.
And then you both have pain and conflict and perhaps some self-loathing.
Mm.
So that's one way to do that situation. Another way to do that situation is to, be in bed and then, give your head the space to sort of feel whatever it's going to feel in response to the pain.
Mm-hmm.
And then like ask yourself, okay, so I'm going to be in bed all day. I'm possibly a bit brain foggy because I'm in a lot of pain, but what could I do while I'm here that brings me joy?
Mm.
Um, what is going to make me happy to do here?
Mm-hmm.
And like I mean happy or joy very loosely. I don't mean like necessarily the feeling of yay. It can mean things like contentment, or it could
Yeah.
be things like having a really good cry while watching a sad film, because
Yeah.
that can be very like releasing and feel good and like not good because sad feels like doesn't necessarily associate well with the word good,
Mm-hmm.
but
But sad can be good. It's sometimes
yeah.
it's necessary, right? I feel like especially with chronically ill or disabled bodies, or just like when you're for people who are neurodivergent, when your brain is just like in a little bit of a different place, like there's a lot to be grieved sometimes,
Yeah.
and like to allow yourself that space to cry or to grieve, I don't know, change, loss, difference, whatever it might be, is really, really necessary.
Yeah. And it like I guess I don't know, I don't want to use this word because I'm not sure everybody will be like, but it's like
Mm,
cathartic. Like there's
mm,
like a release of some kind
mm-hmm.
by letting yourself feel what you're gonna feel.
Yeah.
And not trying to push things away. And I
Mm,
think that's what I mean by disabled joy.
mm,
The not being in conflict with your limitations, and I put that in inverted commas,
yeah.
or with your pain or with symptoms, if that's what you call them,
Mm-hmm.
um, trying to just come to a place of, I guess, being accepting in the moment,
Mm-hmm.
and then deciding what is going to be most fulfilling to do in that
Mm-hmm.
moment.
I'm hearing from you that it's like just to not add on the a level of shame, anger, or self-hate for where your body needs to be, to kind of receive it and then to see where you might want to go,
Yeah.
kind of thing. And sometimes it is yay kind of joyful, and sometimes it's neutral, and sometimes it's a cry, but to at least allow yourself to do that. When I, stay in bed and feel angry, it's kind of like I feel like we punish ourselves for our body to be like this. Sometimes I'll only speak for myself. I think it's my fault. I've been told it's my fault a lot. So, trying to unlearn that, it can't be that if I tried harder, then I wouldn't be in this space. I think there's a lot of that kind of mentality that if I just tried hard enough, then maybe I would just not be chronically ill.
Yeah. Yeah.
And to let that go and find yourself or meet yourself where you are, um, is what I'm understanding as what you're saying as like disabled joy, possibly.
Yeah. And I really like the way you put that, to meet yourself where you are. I think
Yeah.
it's just like I love it. It reminds me of like a poem, but I can't remember what the poem is, so we can skip ahead of that. But yeah, I think the way I really struggled with this in terms of I managed to do it for so many aspects of my life,
Mm-hmm.
but pain took me the longest,
Mm.
because being accepting at all of pain is very difficult for me in particular with EDS, because lots of it is about, like, as I mentioned before, making sure your joints are in the right position.
Mm-hmm.
So like always actively trying to make sure that I'm sitting perfectly, standing perfectly, walking perfectly,
Mm-hmm.
is like it opens you up to all sorts of blaming yourself when you are in pain, because you're like, oh well, I wasn't focusing hard enough.
Yeah.
um and I think the way I managed to conceptualize it for myself in my head was, what's better? Is it better to be in pain and conflict, or is it better to be in pain and feel love for yourself? Like, which one is going to be more livable or enjoyable? And I think, it is like a really hard disabled joy is hard. At least my concept of disabled joy is hard, but it's, I think, like 100% worth trying to make a practice of it.
I think from what I'm hearing you say, something that is also just a learning process, or has been a learning process for me, is that, like, though, as we said, that every minute of every day we have to be thinking of our body, but sometimes you just got to let it go.
Yeah.
You just can't do it perfectly, and your body's sometimes going to fuck up even when you do it perfectly. And sometimes I want to prioritize other things, because yes, I am a person who is disabled, or a person that is chronically ill, but I also get to prioritize fun sometimes. And sometimes that might mean that I'll have fun for a day and then I'm in bed for a whole day. And I can already feel the shame or the shaming of other people, like, in my body when I've made that choice. But it's like, but that's my choice to make. You know what I mean? Like, I'm allowed to do that. And like, being in bed is not me doing something wrong. I think that's like been a shift that I'm still working on. And just like, because I think I've been told so much of my life, like, this is your first priority, this is your first priority, you have to stay healthy, you have to stay healthy. And yes, you do, to a certain degree, but like, I also have to have a fucking life. You know what I mean? Like,
I relate to that.
yeah, has to be a balance, because then what's the fucking point?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think it's like a necessary practice to stop trying sometimes.
Yeah.
Because then how do you even know how to let go if you don't?
It's such an endless chase sometimes, right?
Yeah.
And it's sometimes kind of fraught, and it's okay to not be person who is constantly trying to take care of their body. You got to be other people. You got to assume other roles in your life. And, sometimes it's not always possible to be your ultimate caretaker and, be your super fun self, or, whoever else you want to be, right?
It reminds me, and this is like, it doesn't sound like I was taking care of myself, but it was a kind of self-care. When I had that relapse where I was losing vision, I like suspected it the day before because my vision was kind of funny. It just felt weird, but nothing obvious. And then I woke up the next morning and it was very obvious that I was losing vision in one of my eyes. And I knew what I needed to do. I knew I needed to phone the MS nurse and then go to hospital and blah, blah, blah. And all those
so many steps.
Yeah, and all those things that you're supposed to do as like the most urgent priority when you have some kind of chronic thing. But instead, I got a cup of tea and I sat on the floor and played The Sims for like an hour.
Good for you. I was
like, cool, now I'll go. I am prepared now. And I felt proud of myself for giving myself that time to be just, I don't know, not hammering out this process of.
I think that whole process is going to be everybody else's idea of what self-care is for you. But I feel like when you did that, that is ultimately your definition and your agency of what self-care looks like for you. And that's fucking awesome, because despite how everybody likes to have a fucking opinion, it is like, you got to decide ultimately. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And finally, can you speak a little bit about your art practices, your music, and, pole dancing? Love to see you pole dance.
Oh, thank you. I love to pole dance. They're quite intertwined, the art, the pole, and the music. The music came first because I come from a really musical family.
You got a beautiful voice.
Oh, thank you. My mum would appreciate that because she was a singer when she was younger, and then a
Mm.
singing teacher, and basically we would get yelled at if we were out of tune. So it is
Whew.
drilled into me. Um, but no, she's lovely. So yes, all my artistic practice started with music.
Mm.
And I danced as a kid, but badly. So we'll ignore that. Pole dance has been really recent. Pole dance, one of my partners got me into because they were learning to pole dance at like
Cool.
this amazing set of classes called like Queer Pole that are run in London that have been paused since the pandemic. So
Mm-hmm.
that's been like an amazing community space. And then my visual arts have just been sort of like off and on throughout my life, and
Mm.
the practices, they join together. So like I might paint something and then plop the painting on my piano stand,
Mm.
and then like compose something to the
Mm.
piece of art, and then I might use that music to make pole,
Mm-hmm.
or do it in any order.
From what I'm understanding, it's just kind of like you might have an idea and it goes through almost like different expressions and ruminations to be expressed, right? You can write music about it and then you can express it through your body or visually. And it's just like, it sounds super fun to like have different outlets to express and like ruminate on an idea, right?
Yeah, and they like inform each other. Like
Mm-hmm.
if I'm getting stuck with the music, sometimes I'll just record whatever I have and then I'll dance to it for a bit. Even if it's
Mm.
not finished and it's like and I'm angry at the music because it's not doing what it's told. Um, Sometimes just like recording myself dancing to it, it tells me where the music wants to go. So they're like friends, supportive friends,
Yeah.
I guess.
Or maybe sometimes it's just kind of like with unfinished music, it might be useful for you to dance to it to find like new perspective of maybe how you want to continue with your music or,
Yeah.
you know, how does your art like interact with your body or feel your body? What does it demand of your body?
It's a bit of a balancing act because
Mm.
I get spoons from making art, be it music, visual,
Mhm.
or pole,
Mhm.
for lots of different reasons. But they also take spoons in different ways. So like
Mhm.
I've always processed my emotions through music. But for example, sitting at a piano, um, is quite physically demanding because like you have to be sitting in a very specific position, and my
Mhm.
joints hate sitting
This
in one
position
position.
is not, yeah.
Yeah, and it took
Yeah.
me, I had to like be without my piano for a few weeks to realize how much of my rib pain was coming from piano. So like
Mm.
it's a it's always a balancing act between like different things that I need. I guess pole is the easiest in terms of like how it fuels,
Mm.
because pole has been like so important to me in terms of stabilizing my joints.
Mm.
Because the pole instructor I learned from, um, on Insta, I believe she is Glitter Brow Iris, if anybody wants to check her out.
Cool.
But she also has joint issues, and she was like the first person like who was doing exercise type instructing
Mhm.
that like actually knew how to do access,
Mm.
in terms of like, I don't know, like if I was faint, I would just lay down in the studio, and then she'd be like, okay, just look up when you're okay.
Yeah.
um you know, you don't need to hurry yourself out,
Yeah.
things like that, like, and she knew how to like protect my joints and things like that. I like cannot say how much just having a person with, I don't know if she considers herself to be disabled, but I'm
Mhm.
just going to say a person with joint troubles,
Mhm.
um, teaching body stuff. Because in my mind before that, exercise was purely for abled people.
Mm.
And it was a thing that you would struggle to do as
Mhm.
a disabled person, not something that would help.
Yeah.
And then it has stabilized my joints. So I dislocate them a lot less, and I
Nice.
understand my body more. Um, but again, this is another one of those. I get some things out of it, but also the more I let go and sort of allow myself to dance the way I want to dance, the less I'm thinking about protecting my joints and the more likely I am to damage myself.
Okay.
So it's such a tricky...
The negotiation is everlasting.
Yes. Negotiation with everything.
We're coming to the end of our podcast. This is it.
That went so fast.
Yeah, that went super fast. Thank you so much to George Liu for coming on the podcast to speak with me. I think that was a great episode. Again, I'm Henry, and you just heard another episode of In Our Bodies. If you would like to follow us, it is at In Our Bodies on Instagram. All of the information of how to find George Liu's work will be in the show notes. Also included in the show notes, there will be links to some of the things we spoke about in this episode. Thank you for taking the time to listen, and I'm sending you all of the gentle energy for wherever you may find yourself today. Catch you at the next episode.